자, 그러면 이제 셜리 교수님을 모시고 제2세션을 시작하겠습니다. 아시다시피 그 셜리 교수님께서는 현재 보스턴대학의 교수님으로 계시고요. 그동안에 여러 나라에서 교사 능력 개발 워크숍을 실시한 베테랑 교육계 컨설턴트로 이렇게 말씀드릴 수가 있겠습니다. 교육 변화, 저널 오브 에듀케이셔널 체인지의 편집장이시기도 하고, 우리나라에는 학교교육 제4의 길이라고 번역되어 있습니다만은 여기에 공동 저자로 계십니다. 최근에는 그 교육 변화의 새로운 핵심 원리라는 책과 사려 깊은 마음 챙김 교사, 마인드풀 티처라고 하는 책을 출간하셨고, 그 외에도 수없이 많은 저술과 책을 출판하셨습니다. 이제 셜리 교수님을 모시겠습니다. 박수로 맞아주십시오.
Thank you, colleagues. The remote. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for coming out this afternoon in the sweltering tropical heat. People told me, don't go to Korea in August. It's too hot. I said, I've lived in Texas for 10 years. I can handle it. Little did I know. But I love your country has been so beautiful to us. We came in on August 1st, my wife Shelley and I, and we went hiking in the Soraksan Mountains. And I have never sweated so much in my whole life. I was covered with perspiration. It was still an amazing experience to hike way up into those mountains and see those shrines that have been built. It was just phenomenal. So the subject today is a new way of educational change and leadership. And I realize it might not be traditional for you to hear a keynote speaker following two of your national speakers, but I would like to say for the keynote speaker, it is extremely helpful. I found the remarks of Mr. Lee and Mr. Sohn very, very helpful in understanding your context. So you intended to be helpful, and you were helpful. Thank you very much for that. So I think we're discussing so many different things in educational change today. Here's the structure of my presentation. First of all, who are we as educators now? Who are we? What is our professional identity? Is it to train a rising generation for economic competitiveness? Is it to help our young people to flourish as whole human beings? Those are two answers. They can be harmonized. I think that we can harmonize the quest for economic prosperity with the quest for human flourishing. But we can't do it if we only focus on one or the other. So if we're in systems that have focused a lot on competition and job training, then maybe we need to start thinking about other dimensions. And I wasn't aware of this painful quote of this student committing suicide. There's more to happiness than a GPA. But that sounds like something I could hear many American students saying today. It's not just a Korean phenomenon. So how, colleagues, dear colleagues, here we are, we're giving our lives to this enterprise called education. This is our meaning, this is our purpose, this is our identity. How can we make sure that we honor the hopes and the expectations of the young people who come into our classrooms with their eyes full of hope, full of expectation? How can we help them to transform our schools so that they find in schools the realization of who they really are as individuals, as members of their country, and as global citizens? These are very, very big questions, very exciting intellectual questions, which I encourage us all to explore. So we can come up with different interpretations of the many-sidedness of education. In the US context, like in the Korean context, I would say that we have passed through about 25 years of a very strong emphasis on achievement, going all the way back into the 1980s, really, so even longer, with a focus of a presidential report called A Nation at Risk. So maybe a translation helps here. In the United States, when we think a student is going to drop out of school, we refer to that person as a student at risk. That's the expression that we use. So under President Reagan, a report came out called A Nation at Risk. And since then, we've focused very much on academic achievement. Fine, I'm a professor. I like learning. That's great. But there are many, many other dimensions to being a human being. And increasingly, my good friend and co-author Andy Hargraves and I became convinced that we were going down the wrong road, going down the wrong path in educational change. And when that happens, you have a couple of choices. One is you can keep doing what you've been doing even harder, right? So, because doubt is no fun, right? So instead of doubt, you just do what you've been doing more, harder, more intensely. Or you can stop, really stop, take a look at the children, take a look at the society, take a look at the environment, and think, do we need to redesign our pathway, where we want to go? Now, in the English language cover of The Fourth Way, there is an image of a compass. And that is partly because Andy and I love hiking. And a compass is a very useful thing. It's also a compass because we are not very fond of prescription. So Mr. Son's remarks there on teacher professionalism and the autonomy and the skill set to develop some wonderful lessons. So that's fine, that's part of the job of government. Give us a curriculum, that's fine, we can accept that. It's part of a democratic society, everybody gets a chance to participate in shaping the curriculum. But when it comes to shaping the individual lessons, that's where the mastery of the teacher should sparkle. And our teachers need good colleagues to help them to design good lessons. They need to ask their students, what can I do to help to improve your learning? The community engagement piece, what are the parents hoping for in terms of the aims of education? Not the instruments of education, but the aims of education. So Mr. Lee referred to the OECD report that said that the aim of education is well-being. Okay, good. That's an interesting aim. So Aristotle said that well-being was an orientation to life. And I think his definition shares a number of similarities with that of what I've read of Confucius. So there should be some benevolence. There should be a sense of justice. There should be kindness and generosity. All of these things are part of well-being. And well-being, he said, and our modern research bears this out, doesn't always mean being happy. Okay? You can have a well-being orientation to life, but you can still experience disappointment. You can still find calculus really hard. You can still find Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein still really difficult. But if you have well-being, then you have an orientation to persist in your subjects, even through the hard points, and then to have a sense of accomplishment. These are some of the attributes that I prefer the term integrity to well-being, and that means for me when how you live is harmonized with what you say. And what you say is about contributing to the common good in improving the human condition. Okay? So there's three parts. One is the moral purpose, which was in the OECD, and also in Mr. Son's remarks. There has to be a moral purpose. We have to articulate the moral purpose, and then we have to embody the moral purpose. Our students can detect fakes or phonies a long way away. So I don't have the answer to all of these questions, but I love the grandeur of education that you get to ask big questions. If we can design our profession the right way, everybody gets to go on learning their whole life. Your whole life you get to go on learning. I love this. There was a U.S. Supreme Court justice. His name was Learned Hand. Good name for an educator to like, Learned Hand. Somebody likes learning. When he was in his 80s, he started learning ancient Greek. And a young man said to him, "You're in your 80s. Why are you learning ancient Greek?" And he said, "To improve my mind." Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful attitude towards learning. So who are we? How can we help to achieve, help our students to learn with integrity? And how can we help to look at an old pathway that we've been on with an old sense of things that we needed to do? Imperatives kind of means things that you feel like you need to do, you have to do. How can we look at what we've been doing critically and fairly and with compassion, but also realize we can rethink what we're doing. We can transform education. We can be better. So I'll spend some time on these old and new imperatives, and then for those of you that want practical steps, because educators, we're artists. We want to have some practical tools to work with. I will suggest 5 of those, and then try to offer some words of encouragement for the journey ahead. So, like Mr. Son, is an ambitious agenda for the time that we have, but let's just do our best. Ladies and gentlemen, we had a break, and we don't want to go outside, right? Speaking to you on a day that's so hot is great, because nobody wants to leave to go outside. This is what we call in English a captive audience. All right. I love this kind of thing right here. Front teeth are missing. Isn't that great? So our children come to us, their bodies are changing, they're trying to learn how to be good friends, they're curious about the world. How can we honor their curiosity? How can we let them know that we care about their well-being? That in a very professional way, we feel a deep love for them, that we want them to prosper, we want them to have good lives. How can we do that? How can we honor our students? Well, one thing that we can do in this process is we have to think about this person, the classroom teacher. There's a lot more students than there are teachers. So with whatever policies we design, we have to think, what are we doing to support this teacher who is going into the classroom every day? And this should be the mission of our principals, our vice principals, our school counselors, our research team, central office administrative staff in the provinces, in the districts, in the metropolitan areas, supporting those classroom teachers so that they can help our students to flourish. And for the researchers in the room, if you get a chance to do something like I was fortunate to do, which is to write a book with classroom teachers. So this was an extremely important point that was brought up. The teachers need time and space to ask their own questions. Not questions from the top of the ministry, although those might be good questions, but if we are going to move towards a learning society, how can we encourage everyone to be asking good questions, deep questions, complicated questions, questions that maybe make us a little uncomfortable to even think about that question, understanding that this is part of the journey of the life of the mind. So I was very fortunate A number of years ago, I realized that I was a teacher educator who was not working as closely as I should be with teachers. So I invited a bunch of teachers in the Boston Public Schools to start Saturday seminars with me. We met on the Boston College campus. Everybody had coffee and donuts from Dunkin' Donuts. You know about Dunkin' Donuts here? If you're in Boston and you have a meeting with teachers in the breakfast time, you must bring Dunkin' Donuts. Otherwise, the whole meeting will fail. It doesn't matter what else you do. So we would have Dunkin' Donuts, and teachers would come in with their messy issues from classroom practice. I have one group of students that just won't pay attention. I have 35 parents, and each one says to me, "Make sure my child gets special attention." Right? I have new curricula coming in every few years. I was just getting good with the old one. Now I have some new things to do. So all of these challenges that teachers would bring, messy problems, and they could present them to their colleagues on the Boston College campus in a nice building with chandeliers, kind of like this, nice lights, nice big round table, and just help those teachers to unload, share their challenges, their frustrations in a zone where you have to have something, the English call it the Chatham House rules. That means whatever you say in that room stays in that room. Okay, so if people are complaining about a colleague or whatever, it has to stay in that space. And we wrote a first edition of this book, The Mindful Teacher, so the teacher who thinks about her or his practice and making it better. And we just came out with this second edition, which has new chapters. One is on mindful school leadership. So how can we help our leaders to be good, reflective thinkers? And another chapter on mindful teaching with technology. So with technology, we can easily use it as a crutch, as a tool to entertain. How can we use technology in really deep and powerful ways? So this was a book that really helped me with my own change journey, working with colleagues and understanding that there has to be more to learning than just getting the test scores up. Interesting as is. This is the new book that I did about how we might need to change things. Okay? Because at one point I was teaching this book to some of my Boston College students, and one of them said, "That's really nice you have these Saturday seminars. Teachers come in, they meditate, they do some yoga, they do some relaxation, but wouldn't it be better if you just tried to fix the problems that are driving them crazy in the first place?" So that's what the second book is about, trying to change the environment that makes teaching so difficult today. Now, part of the problems I'll ask you to think about have to do with how we understand achievement. So in many systems, we have been thinking about achievement as student test score results. We've got to get the test score results up. We've got to drive them up as far as we can. Especially if our students are struggling, we've got to push the results up hard. And you know what? A lot of educators like that. And students like it too, because it simplifies everything. I don't have to pay attention to my students' well-being. I don't have to think about goals for 2030. I don't have to think about climate change. I just have to get the test scores up. The rest of it, somebody else can take care of. Okay? But if we're not careful with that kind of thinking, we can end up with a very imbalanced kind of education, I suggest, and especially looking at the history of Korea and the struggle for a truly democratic and free society, that requires some skills in citizenship, and not just mathematics or reading or science, which are measured on many assessments. So let's see if we can broaden our understanding of achievement to include the attainment of a worthy goal. So I work with all kinds of schools. One of my favorites is a high school for young people who have run into trouble in school. They dropped out. It's a vocational school. It helps young people to get jobs. But of course, education is broader than that. So one of the first questions that young people are asked when they get to the school is, what is something that you would like to accomplish? Something you would like to get good at? And one student can say, I would like to be more confident when I speak to a bunch of people. Another student can say, I would love to play a musical instrument, any instrument. Another student can say, I'd like to be good at a sport. Students get a chance to define for themselves something that they want to achieve. And by the way, accomplishment is one of the 5 ingredients for well-being. But it's an accomplishment that the individual chooses, that is not imposed. Okay, so this element of agency matters a lot. And then I would suggest that there's a third way that we can think of achievement, which is as a result of a whole school system. So yesterday I had a chance to meet with Governor Cho. In the US, we would say the superintendent of schools here in Korea. And I was very impressed with the effort to address well-being in your system now, the effort to make that a foundational part of your educational system. This is a different understanding of a school system. It's a different understanding of what a society is about. I wonder what would have to happen in Korea for everyone to feel that we want everyone to flourish. We don't want to have any outsiders in our society. We want everyone to have at least some friends, some social networks to support them. This is the big project that's going on in Norway, by the way. And Norway is already #1 in the world on well-being by many indicators. But you know, a few years ago, they had a young man who killed over 100 young Norwegians. And after that, what they said in the schools is, what can we change so that nobody feels like an outsider? It's a wonderful mission for schools and society. So that could be one kind of an achievement. So I ask you to think about achievement. What are we doing as a profession in a broad sense of achievement? And then what is integrity? So we can think of personal integrity, somebody who walks the talk. You look at that person and it's straight talk. She says what she thinks. He speaks what he feels. There is a harmony, there is a consistency there. Or you can think of integrity as a professional disposition. It's an attribute of an individual who is a teacher. Okay, you can see that they are conscientious, they plan their lessons well, they engage with students well, and they assess fairly. And then finally, you can think of integrity or this wholeness as a result of a whole school system. And I think that this is what you are trying to move towards, if I'm understanding your innovative school movement correctly. You're trying to move towards this kind of integrity in your school system, and you're asking yourselves this question: how can we harmonize this relationship between achievement and integrity? Of course we want our students to learn. We want them to learn many, many different kinds of things. So we're all reading the news about artificial intelligence and all the jobs that it's going to eliminate. On the one hand, that's fabulous. Okay? Ideally, at one point maybe we can live in a world where nobody has to clean toilets. Nobody has to sweep streets. Wouldn't that be great? Okay? But what it does mean for educators is if we are just preparing people for the jobs that exist today, we are failing our students. And we are doing this in my country right now. We are preparing young people in auto repair, even though most people are saying in another 7 years, we will be beginning a big transition to self-driving vehicles. So anybody who is learning car repair today is not going to have a job. It's like preparing somebody to repair typewriters in 1980. So the answer to that has to be really thinking creatively about kinds of achievement, problem posing and problem solving, and imagination are big parts of that, creativity. And if we could capitalize on our young people's imagination, wouldn't that be such an exciting thing? They have so much creativity. So these are some of the things that we need to be thinking about now, I think, as we move towards change. Now, I'll move a little bit quickly here because I'm a professor. I love to talk. I get all excited, but I go on, and you guys could be here till midnight. So, why does this matter? It matters, oh, I'm sorry, a little too fast here. Let's imagine that you put together an X and a Y atlas with low integrity here and high integrity there, and low achievement here and high achievement there. Let's imagine that we did that, right? And let's imagine we had 4 different quadrants, and what might be in those quadrants. So in one quadrant, you might have a school with low achievement and low integrity. I've worked in many of these schools. The kids are really poor. The parents are undocumented immigrants. They move in and out, always trying to find a better paying job, a better place to live. The school system somehow decides that because the test scores aren't going up, there must be something wrong with the educators. There must be something wrong with the principal. So they fire the principal and they get rid of half of the teachers, and the results just don't improve because there is no stability. So I would suggest this is an example of how you get low achievement with no integrity in the school system. Now you can get high achievement and low integrity. One school I worked with did it this way. The students were also from a very poor neighborhood, and the teachers were very collective in that school, and the kids were getting very, very good results, and nobody could figure out how do they do it? How do they get these great test score results? Well, one year, the school district switched from giving the students paper and pencil tests to computer tests, and the test score results went way down. And it led people to think, maybe in that school, people were erasing the students' wrong answers and putting in their right answers, so that it was all fake all along. You actually had low achievement and low integrity, but it looked like high achievement and with integrity. Now you can also get lots of integrity. You can have an educator who loves the kids, loves the parents, has tons of positive energy. I worked in a school like this with a principal. I called him Dr. Love. He would go around from classroom to classroom. It didn't matter what was happening. It was magnificent. His answer to any problem was praise. Tell the teachers how great they are. Tell the parents how much he loves them. Tell the kids that they're the best in the world. So for him, he had integrity. He was also a minister in a church nearby with over 500 members. So he was taking phone calls throughout the day from the members of his church. He had lots of integrity, lots of love, but the school had very low achievement. Now, how can we get to the sweet spot where we have high achievement and high integrity? My favorite schools have done this by using a strategy very similar to leading from the middle. You activate the profession. You take all that knowledge that people have that they maybe talk about at home over dinner or at a Friday or Saturday night over a beer, and you find ways to take that knowledge base and bring it into your school. I worked in one school in Germany where the teachers decided they would all start visiting each other's classes and giving each other positive and negative feedback on their teaching. And the principal was also a teacher in that school, and he also got feedback from his colleagues. We have another school in Boston, the Orchard Gardens K-8 school, where we had security guards in the building, like hired police officers. A new principal came in. He got rid of all of those people, and he used that money to find the very best arts and music teachers he could in the whole United States of America, and to let the students know anything that they did that was positive around achievement. And that school improved its achievement results. So we can improve learning by activating our colleagues in the profession and rethinking what we are doing. And I'm hoping that that's what you are undertaking also in your innovative school movement. Now the argument then becomes, how did we get off into these old imperatives that led us down tricky paths? Some of this is ideological. So all the way back in the 1980s in the US and England, models were developed which emphasized competition, testing, and marketplace models of reform. It put a lot of pressure on educators. And because these reforms were being generated in the United States and England, and these countries have a lot of power, they pushed these ideas out globally. The $10 word for that is neoliberalism. They pushed these reforms around testing and accountability out all over the world. These were very prescriptive. Educators were told exactly what they needed to do. Educators were given pacing guides telling them how much time they should spend on each part of a lesson. So educators were not exercising judgment, they were implementing instructions. Another part of this, tragically, is that countries became quite insular during this time. So my country, the United States, has the world's longest border with Canada. Canada does very well on its achievement results and on equity. But we were so fixated on our own results, we couldn't learn from our neighbors. We became insular, and then education became very instrumental. It was all about getting those test score results. Everyone became focused on that in the whole system. Can we come up with another model? Here is a proposal. It has 5 parts. First of all, instead of being blinded by ideology, let's get better at looking at evidence, all kinds of evidence. By the way, there's more to happiness than a GPA is a form of evidence. It tells you that something's wrong with the system. It doesn't just have to be something that you measure quantitatively. And instead of an imperative, can we encourage our educators to look at the messiness of student learning, get it all out on the table, everything you know about the students, and try and make sense of what you think is going on, and not see that as something that is a side issue, but it is the heart of building professional knowledge. Instead of prescription, can we say that we are true professionals? We're smart, we work together, we make good decisions. And instead of being isolated, can we understand that we're part of an interconnected world, ecologically, economically, socially, culturally? We have so much to learn from each other that can help to give our lives meaning and purpose. So human beings have a quest for meaning and purpose. I think, if you ask anyone, they might say, it's to help to support my family. That's a meaning and a purpose. They might say, I work every day because I care about my community. But a lot of our young people today suffer from anxiety and depression. And some of this is because they haven't found their meaning and purpose. But that's something that schools can help with. So the argument I'll be sharing with you is we've had these old imperatives that have run their course. They've run out of energy. They're old. They need renewal. And they have led to something called testing for fidelity. And fidelity here means loyalty. Okay? You're testing for accuracy. But ideally, in our educational system, testing is for some larger purpose. It's not for the tests themselves. It's to help our young people to lead lives of meaning and purpose, to build a better country, to build a better world. So if we can, we have a new compass, a new set of roadmap, and this leads towards achievement with integrity. So that means learning, means accomplishment, and it means you do it as a whole person, as you educate whole children for the whole world. This may be a little bit utopian. This may be what we call a pipe dream. So we used to have cartoons where Popeye the Sailorman would smoke his pipe and he would have different things he was dreaming about in his pipe. And on bad days, I think that this is all we'll ever do. Because often when we try change, we go a little bit, then we run into some problems, and then we give up and go back to the old way. So Mr. Lee's remarks were on Michael Fullen. Michael Fullen uses this expression, an implementation dip. So if you're working with your Hyukshin schools, with your innovative schools, and they struggle for a little bit, try not to give up immediately. Try not to panic and run back to the old way. See what you're learning and see what can be done next to help to improve the situation. So this is the roadmap, if you will, the journey for the new imperatives. Let me say a little bit more about some of these parts and get a little bit practical. So when we say study all of the evidence, what can we mean here? I'm just going to cover this quickly. So Korea is always in the top 10 on the international tests, right? It's at the top in science. It's at the top also, this is PISA results in mathematics, way high up there. Reading also, Korea does very well. Korea has had no problems excelling on international achievements. There's very small differences in the results here between Singapore, Hong Kong, or Korea. Korea's done very well on those results. But in 2015, for the first time, the OECD asked about student well-being. This wasn't so pretty. Korea's results, you can see them right there. There's only one country lower than Korea on student well-being. So this is life satisfaction over here on the left. This is student performance over here on the right, on science, on the PISA results. You can see Korea is up here with the high-achieving jurisdictions, but only one jurisdiction are students having a harder time, and that's Turkey. Now, if we had lots of time, it would be great. I don't know if you do this here with your professional development, but we would have what we call a turn-in talk in the US, and everybody would turn and talk to a neighbor, and they would say, why is this, and what would we have to do to get Korea to move from here up into here, where you have high performance and high life satisfaction? What could we do? Well, a simple answer of what you could do is you could start an innovative school movement which would focus on students' well-being and happiness and democratic participation in society and give the students an opportunity to become partners in change and see what they have to say. That's one of the things that you could try. I want to encourage you, obviously, today in my remarks. We are now watching you very carefully because we see your innovative school movement as a sign of hope for the world. So when you are working in your schools, please don't just think, this is just for me, okay? Ontario just elected a kind of a slightly crazy prime minister. I don't know if you heard anything about his brother. His brother had problems with cocaine, and now that he was the mayor of Ontario. So Ontario has been a fabulous jurisdiction to study, but it's now running into trouble. So now, where are people going to be looking for change? I would love it if they would look here in Korea. You have strong research arms and components. Please join us in the international community that is trying to improve achievement with integrity. So there's Korea. What could we do about this? So if we study all the evidence, we also look at the evidence which says that our students are not faring well. So 3 questions which I'll just ask you to reflect on. First, what evidence do we have on student learning? That's traditional PISA data. What evidence do we have on student well-being? And what evidence do we have on other things that we care about? Other things that we care about. So I'm very fortunate. I never grew up in a culture that was colonized by another nation and where we had to learn another language. If I was Korean, I would probably be very proud of our struggles to recover our heritage. And I would say, while it's good to look forward, I also want to hold on to the best of the past. So I would ask questions about what's our cultural heritage and how can we make sure that we build upon the very best of our past. The future is important, but the past shapes us also. And every human being has a culture. That's actually part of the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. So that was about evidence. Now with interpretation, how can we interpret evidence intentionally? Well, we got to get together in some kinds of teams. Somehow we have to figure out how we're going to collaborate together. The old model of the isolated teacher going to the classroom, shutting the door, is finished. Okay? That has been proven time and again. It doesn't work. You end up with a lot of unevenness. You have some very high flyers. You have some people in the middle. You have some disasters at the bottom. We have to find ways to work together. Maybe you call it professional learning communities. Maybe you call it teacher learning communities. I don't care. Okay, but the old model of the isolated artisan teacher is finished. We have to figure out ways to pool our knowledge base together. And they've been doing very good work on this in Ontario that Andy Hargraves and I have documented in our Leading from the Middle report. So Ontario is about 13 million people. It is the largest province in Canada, and we studied 10 different school districts, most of them close to New York State or Michigan, one way up in the far northwest. And we interviewed 222 educators about leading from the middle in their profession. What do they hope for? What do they aspire for? Look, colleagues, we have to be honest. Governments come and go. Okay? They will swing from the left, they will swing to the right. Grassroots movements will come and go. They'll have all different kinds of opinions about different things that need to happen. At the end of the day, it's the teachers, it's the principals, it's the people in the middle of the system who've got to make it work, even while all of this change is happening around you. So we can't just say, the ministry made me do it. I don't like it, the ministry made me do it. We can't just say, this mother made me do this thing. We have to be professionals, and that means that we exercise judgment. And this is the big concept of leading from the middle, which, as Mr. Lee pointed out, is gone global very, very quickly. New Zealand has an excellent report out on leading from the middle. In Wales, they have a group called the South Wales Challenge, which is a network very, very similar to your Innovative Schools network, which is trying to energize teaching and learning in very, very similar ways. We have an article coming out in the Journal of Educational Change about Wales. If I could just put this out there, the time is ripe sometime in the next couple of years for a big international educational summit here in Seoul. Don't hide your innovative schools. Don't hide them. I didn't really know much about them until I came here. Okay? Now, part of the reason that Ontario got to be so successful, they had the world's best educational entrepreneur, Michael Fullen, who was just constantly talking about the great stuff they were doing. But you're doing great stuff too. So don't hide it. Get your researchers out promoting it, travel, present, let the rest of the world know, and then come up with your own definition of leading from the middle. What we saw in Ontario recently was that they're moving beyond narrow achievement to a very broad definition of learning. They are doing a lot of work around child well-being now. They have Indigenous youth, we would say Native American youth in the United States who have not been doing well. And so they're trying to make sure that those young people do well and that their cultural identities are nourished also, and their Indigenous languages. So this is a kind of a Canadian model of leading from the middle. And I would like to be on a symposium with you, with somebody presenting on the Korean model of leading from the middle, and somebody from New Zealand, and somebody from Wales. We need your voices in the international community. So Leading from the Middle is the name of our report. It studied 4 parts of Ontario's pillars for education since 2014, one of which was brand new, which was promoting well-being. So Ontario, just like you, said, we want our young people to be well. We don't want to just do well on achievement and on measured results. We want our young people to be well. And Canadian young people have only been in the middle of the international rankings, by the way. So how did they set about helping to make sure that their young people could be well? Well, the first thing that happened, this didn't happen in the Ministry of Education. It happened in the Ministry of Children and Youth Services. That ministry said, let's ask our young people. what they would need to be well. And so they issued a call, and they get 25 young people from all across Ontario to form an advisory team on being well. And they said, any other young person between the ages of 12 or 18 who wants to give us ideas, please join an online community. So they got the young people themselves involved in defining what well-being would be. And they came up with a graphic model, and this is what it looks like. They said that well-being has physical component, physical excellence. Smart, you know some things, you can make good decisions. You're emotionally responsive to the world, and it has a social dimension. And in the middle, we learn how to look after ourselves, and we are also going to attend to the spirit, or what the Native Americans call the Great Spirit. That has to be part of our well-being model. So this was part of what we looked at that was undertaken in Ontario. That model was then taken, and it was then applied into the Ministry of Education program, and students imagined the future of their educational system. What did students say they wanted their educational system to be like? They said they wanted more one-on-one learning, and they wanted to nurture creativity. They didn't have enough creativity in their system. Sometimes you don't need to be creative, you just need to know how to use a microphone. But that was social learning. Thank you for pointing the finger. Okay. Then they were asked the second year, what would we have to do to achieve excellence? Big themes around culture, multicultural clubs, exploring other cultures, learning about other cultures. These are things that educators care about also. And then finally, when they were specifically asked about their well-being, they cared a lot about diversity. We want to find ways to celebrate our diversity. We want to have social justice clubs because we want everybody to be included in our school and community. We want to feel comfortable in school and not ashamed, especially when we're struggling. So young people have a lot of good ideas, promoting well-being awareness. So consultation directly with the young, direct democracy. What do they want? What would they aspire for? Now, we also looked at other models. In England, they came up with a model of well-being that focused on leadership and management. Very different model. So when you're using well-being in Korea, please be specific about how you're using it. And in New South Wales, they come up with a definition that says our students will be actively connected to their learning, have positive and respectful relationships, and experience a sense of belonging to their school and community. So there would be connection. They'll have a chance to succeed. They'll be respected, valued, encouraged, and supported. They will grow and flourish. They will do well and prosper. So we looked with our Canadian colleagues at these three different models, and then we criticized them. Okay? No model is perfect. So we looked across systems, and we looked at what was held in common by these different systems, what were some of the differences between them, and we also looked at what is missing in their definitions of well-being. So the educators said there's nothing about physical health in New South Wales. They said that the English model didn't have any connection to the physical or the spiritual. And they looked at the Canadian model, and they said there's an assumption that applies to all. Maybe there are many different ways to be well. Maybe there's not just one way. So these are the kinds of questions that educators are asking each other, and I would love to know, in your schools, what are the discussions around well-being? How are you understanding it? It would be wonderful if there was a fourth graphic that we had that we could put up there and that we could discuss with Korean colleagues. So there we go. Sorry, I'm going to have to move a little more quickly here. So some questions you could ask yourselves are, how are you developing student voice? How are you developing opportunities for the students to speak? How are you engaging the community? And are you studying some international comparisons? And international comparisons doesn't mean worshiping Finland or Singapore or any place. It means having a critical attitude, towards what's going on. So you develop your own model. Now I'm going to have to move a little bit more quickly here because I am terribly behind the time. So let me just skip over some of these things and say the world is changing and our education system needs to change. And we can't, in a world of robotics, this is a factory, a car factory today. We can't think the way that we are going to build a real education profession is just by telling teachers what they have to do and making sure that they do it. What we'll have to do will be develop teachers who are good at this art of reflective judgment. We need a new model of professionalism, ladies and gentlemen, and it has to have 3 parts. Human capital, we need our educators to be smart. Social capital, we need to figure out ways that we can rely on and trust each other. Just that you've created a network of innovative schools is an enormous achievement. What I would like to know, though, is if a teacher is struggling, does she or he have the confidence to share that they're struggling? That's an interesting moment in developing social capital. And then decisional capital, do teachers have the supports they need to make good judgments? This is what Andy and Michael Fullen came up with as professional capital. The OECD used different languages to describe the same things. They said the new profession combines knowledge and peer networks of educators and educators' autonomous judgments. I'm not so sure about this part. Some of that's good. We've done a lot of work with that. But what's interesting is that knowledge is coming together from independent scholars and from the OECD. So how can we document students' learning? You can start using iPads. You can start filming your students. You can start taking photographs of them, and you can develop a file on each one of them. These are blurred, intentionally blurred. This is going on in Ontario right now. And when parents come in and say, how do I know my student is learning? You can say, here's what they could do in September, here's what they could do in November, here's what they can do in February, and here's what they can do now. So some of what well-being is doing is helping us to look more closely at student learning. And in Ontario, they are calling students like that a student of wonder. So if you want to have a discussion about a student, you take a picture of that student, you put it in the middle of a table with all the evidence that you know about student learning all around that, and then you put together a diverse team of people to explore that student's learning. And some of those people will be teachers, some of them will be curriculum consultants, some might be cultural consultants if the child has another language than Korean. Some might be special education consultants to work with students with learning disabilities. A vice principal could be there. A community liaison could be in the meeting. Parents could even be in meetings. What I really like about the Ontario model, what they've been doing is these kinds of team meetings only happen for as long as it's useful. Maybe have 3 of these to help to identify a solution for a problem that a student is having with their learning. Now, what kinds of concrete practical interventions could have multidisciplinary teams come up with regard to student well-being? Well, they go to students themselves and ask them, this is from a high school, what are some ways that you can take a break when you're completely stressed out? Well, you can pet a furry creature. You can pet a cat or a dog, okay? You can notice your body and where it's stressed out. You can walk outside. You can write in a journal. You can meditate. These are high school students coming up with ways to regulate their well-being. I have 5 minutes. The best way to deal with stress is slowly, right? These are kindergarten students. Their teacher helped them to create a calming area. If you think that doesn't look like proper English, that's because they're kindergartners. They're just learning how to spell. It looks like a calming area. But why do you go to the calming area? You go because you're tired. You go because you're sad. Or you go because you're angry. Or you go because you're hyper. Hyper means like this. You got too much energy, right? And what can you do when you get there? You can read a book. You can take 10 calming breaths. So students are getting help in self-regulation now in schools. This is in the far north, a school where a lot of the students have fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, and those students are just very nervous. Their hands are always running all over the place. So they started climbing all over this cupboard area. So what the educators did is they said, we need to give them a productive area to climb. So they put into their classroom a climbing wall, okay? So if you're a student and you just got restless energy, you can just run over and climb up and down the wall 10 times. Get the energy out, now come back to the group. Okay, these are all part of strategies of well-being that can help our young people to stay in schools, to continue their education, to enjoy their education. So these are some very good things that educators are doing right now. I believe they're strengthening the profession, and I believe it is a very good example of leading from the middle, also incidentally harmonizing new and old technologies. So there's a lot of things that are happening that we can learn from out there in our schools and systems. Now these last two are just going to be short. Right now we're in an age of nationalism, ladies and gentlemen. Believe me, I know about this. But in our world, we're all interdependent. This is a friend of mine in Singapore. We went to a restaurant, it's called Dolce Tokyo. It combines a Japanese tea house with Italian desserts. I was teaching in Venice, Italy, and I showed this picture to my students in Venice, and I asked them, what do you think about Dolce Tokyo? And my Japanese students said, it's a bad idea. Japanese cuisine all belongs together. And my Italian students said, it's a bad idea. Italian cuisine all belongs together. And there was one student who said, what if it tastes good? And this student, his name was Tom Ikeda, and his father was Japanese, and his mother was Italian. And he was from the US. What I think Tom recognized is that our world is changing rapidly, and that we can learn from each other. And it requires some adjustment. And of course, you want to have traditional Japanese and Italian restaurants, but we can also enjoy the play and interconnection and borrowing from one culture to another. So can we dare to be global? Can we dare to learn? We can, I think. The UN is leading the way with this, with those 17 Sustainable Development Goals, one of which is quality education, and the incredibly beautiful Declaration of the Rights of the Child, which, by the way, guarantees in Article 12 the right of the children to express their ideas about education insofar as they are able and responsible to. It also guarantees the right of children to play. Very, very interesting parts of the Declaration of the Right of the Child. So one question I'm asking myself a lot right now is, how are we developing whole children for the whole world? When I was a child, my father was in the US Army. He was stationed in Naples, Italy. I could see the damage of the Second World War all around me. It wasn't anything abstract. It was something very real. I'm hoping we can secure a peaceful future for all of the world's people. And then finally, can we make education meaningful and purposeful? Good to get to happiness, good to get to flourishing. These are the books that are being studied now and used by the OECD in Paris. They're fun. They're nice to read about. You read about happiness, you start feeling happy. It's a good deal. The arguments are that well-being has 5 parts: positive emotions, engagement with the world, good relationships, meaning, and accomplishments. I would like to point out, though, that there is some research that shows that sometimes people choose meaning and accomplishments instead of their own happiness, and that those can be some of our bravest leaders. So these could be the Mahatma Gandhis, the Martin Luther Kings, who didn't wake up in the morning and say, what can I do today to be happy? They woke up in the morning and said, what can I do today to make a better world? So these are important questions when we ask about well-being that I'd ask you to think about. Finally, I want to end. We've spoken about student voice. This is a direct voice from a Canadian student. Don't give up on us. Even though we aren't always easy and we know your jobs are really hard, please don't give up on us. So we all have those students in our classes who start to think, well, they've just forgotten about me. My teachers don't really see me. If they see me at all, they just see me as a test score result. So our students want us to be human with them in the fullest sense of the word. Our students want us to help them to find meaning and purpose for their lives so they can live lives with dignity, with purpose, with intention, so that when they come to the end of their days, they say, I didn't just waste my life. I wasn't just chasing an illusion. I actually chose a goal for myself that I pursued. And even if I failed in reaching it, it was my goal. It was my dream. And that makes all of the difference. So, study evidence, interpret it, strengthen the profession, dare to be global, and help to find meaning and purpose. These are 5 things that I think we all can help to do to reinvent our profession, and I hope that this are some helpful reflections for all of you as educators. We're a diverse group, the world's educators. We come from all over, all colors, all shapes, all sizes. We have a precious responsibility to play. I would say it's even a sacred one. It has religious and spiritual dimensions. It has human dimensions. It should have some humor, should have some tragedy when things don't work out, but it should lead to a very full and rewarding life for all of the educators in the profession. And if we all put our shoulders to the wheel of history, then I think we can shape a better future for our students. I do want to say I am so honored, deeply honored to be a speaker here before you today. I do want to encourage you to persist, please, with your innovative school movement. We are following it very closely now internationally. Help us to learn from you, and thank you so much for your kind attention.
감사합니다.